What's up, everybody? My name is West Coast Fred, and I decided to make a video. Now, the topic today: why is racism stuff based upon the British or Spanish or Portuguese or Irish or Swedish, Norwegian cultures? Any culture that's Western culture outside the subcontinent of Europe, but it's in other places like Australia, Canada. I would say even those Latin countries, because they were colonized by the Spanish, the French, and the Portuguese. In some places in the Caribbean, in some places in the Caribbean where they have the English, is where I got into Western countries. Even though it's some of them are predominantly black and brown, but it has a strong European influence there because they are the ones who named those countries when they kind of took hold of the power and resources of those lands. Now, what I want to talk about today is why is racism so rampant in Western countries? Okay, so I was looking at my friend Ryan and on his Facebook page, and he's constantly debating with conservatives, and I make it a point to maybe sometimes interject just because I want to add something to what he's saying or kind of back him up on what he's saying. But now I feel like I need to say something that I cannot be said in one post. Now, when I'm hearing people talk in those comment sections of Facebook, not just Ryan's Facebook, but other people's Facebooks that talk about some of the things that I do when it comes to racial issues or politics, I really don't have to talk about what racism is when it comes to a black person, or maybe even sometimes someone who's Latino. But when it comes to when I find that people who are white, I find that even though they seem to be aware of what's going on, I don't feel as if they know the origins completely as to why. And it's hard to have the discussion of what I'm talking about, and I lose them and they lose me of what I'm talking about. And they're just like, okay, I don't know what you mean completely, but I get what you're saying. So they'll just give a nod and thumbs up. They understand what I'm saying. But I always feel that sometimes I need to retell the stories. Why is racism so rampant in the West? And here's and that's what I want to explain today. Now, let me explain why I need to say this and what led me to even investigate the origins of racism. Back in 2013, I listened to a podcast. It was called Mackless's Radio Show. It was about an older black man, and he would constantly talk about basically black female relationships. And he would give basically, it was an African American centered podcast radio show, and he would teach African American males in particular to how to date inside the race and outside the race, because whenever we date, we're always dealing with race would always come up. So that's why he made the show. So when he said one thing, he said before the 1600s, there was no such thing as racism. No one referred to themselves as black, white, Hispanic, Arab, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Chinese. All these terms were made after the 1600s, when people like the Spanish, Portuguese started going in the world, and Portuguese started going here, and Spanish went there, and English went in the Western Hemisphere, and all these other places. The concept of racism is about 500 years old, but the concept of color is a whole lot longer. Before I can tell you what racism or colorism is, I must get and teach you anyone. This is really particularly people who are white and want to know. I feel like sometimes the way they talk, they kind of get what it is, but they don't know the history behind it. And this is rough for me to kind of tell you guys. It's just for you to learn something, and hopefully you take it, because if we were able to talk about this and you needed to know certain things, then I would need you to know this, because this is a very important part of Indo-European history. I'm not going to say European world. Okay, so going back to the roots of racism, okay? Colorism, racism is really a social hierarchy, okay? the oldest social hierarchy in the world is in ancient India. And even before I go into ancient India's history, I must talk about a group of people who settled in the place known as Central Asia, Asia Minor, also known as Central Asia. But it wasn't called those places in like 5,000, 10,000 years ago. See, to understand racism, you must understand what a social hierarchy is. A social hierarchy is like the pyramid scheme. The lower you on the totem pole, you are basically working for the people in the higher echelons of the system. Pyramid scheme. When you are higher on the food chain, the people under you serve you, but you are still, unless you're on the very top, you're still serving the 8, 10, or 15 other levels of people above you who get more rights, privileges, and exemptions from all the other people down. Basically, if you're on top, everybody works for you. If you're on the bottom, you work for everyone above you. Now that you get that, see, the oldest social hierarchy is in India, okay? And before India was formed, it was called the Hindu Kush Valley. Look it up, the Hindu Kush Valley, or the Indus Valley Civilization. The Indus Valley Civilization had these people linguistically known as Dravidians. Very dark, very black, curly hair, long. These Dravidians, now I don't know their real name, but that's the linguistic name. That's all the language, the Dravida language. These people settled in India. They came from East Africa thousands of years ago. They left Nubia. Descendants of the Kushites. But considering people of color, dark black soil people, you will find people that look like me in many parts of the world, like the Caribbean, Africa, Southeast Asia, and the islands, and even maybe North Asia, and maybe pocket places around the Mediterranean and in Europe. But this was where in ancient times, basically everywhere around the world, in ancient times, there was black and brown people. There were no light-skinned people. There were no people as light as Brad Pitt, up until a few thousand years ago, okay? A lot of the civilizations in China, Cambodia, all the islands, most of all of Africa, the entire Western Hemisphere, Canada, down to Ecuador, Peru, we all had different shades of brown. We came from very brown skin to very dark skinned people, sometimes jet black. You can see old pictures of Native Americans, okay? Now, and I had to say that to explain where the physical appearance of the mankind is. And you can find that by looking at pictures of people's ancient history. So, to understand racism or colorism you must understand a social hierarchy. Social hierarchies, the first one, oldest one, is in India. And it had 5 different levels. The Brahmins were at the top. The Kshatriyas were second. The Vaishyas were third. The Shudras were the fourth. And then you had a fifth caste called the Untouchables, or the Dalits. Now, what do these mean? See, the Brahmins were the first people that created that religion, the Vedic religion known as Hinduism. You created the Vedas and explained in the 5,000 hymns of the history of India and what each people served, what place in the Hindu caste system that they served. These Brahmins, also known as Aryans, came from Central Asia. They speak an Indo-European language. Now, what does that really mean? Well, what I mean is when humankind was mostly of dark brown and black and beige people, when humankind started to reproduce itself, it gave birth to a very light people. This is long before they were white or Caucasian. Those terms did not exist. Even though there were people who you can go back in like 10,000 years ago and see people who look like, okay, maybe they're kind of white, but they weren't. There was no such thing. when humankind gave birth to, I'm gonna say, light-skinned people, these light-skinned people went all around, I would say, Asia. Some of them settled in what you know today as Europe. And then when I'm talking about the people who had more color to them, I'm talking like Persians and Iranian people. They are the descendants of those people who started colorism. This is more like the Persian Empire, like these people who spoke Sanskrit. See, a lot of these, where it starts is these nomadic pastoral warriors, these nomadic people who lived a nomadic lifestyle, who rode horses, and they had chariots, and they had the skills of fighting and killing. That's why they were able to. These are the people, they live in small numbers, but they were great fighters. They knew how to militarize themselves. They knew how to forge metal and have bows and weapons. They knew how to fight with horses and travel great distances, and they can settle in one place and go to the next. So they were able to take over lands full of dark people and harass them, terrorize, and eventually take over these villages. Because even though this might be unfortunate to some black and brown people, they were caught off guard. They did not have that warrior live by the sword, die by the sword mindset. This came because these nomadic warriors who knew how to hunt, fight, and kill, that was their way of life. That's how they knew to survive. And they were much lighter than everybody else. You know, these Persian-like people. And these people, they mostly spent most of their time on a place known as the steppe, the Caspian steppe, or the Eurasian steppe. Look it up. See, the Eurasian steppe was a plateau that stemmed from all the way from Eastern Europe all the way from up to northern China. Okay, and you had two types of nomadic pastoral warrior people, nomads. You had more of the Indo-European type, which is more ancient people who spoke the parent languages of who spoke like Sanskrit, Hindi, Farsi, Urdu. The people who really, it's like pre-European culture, Indo-European, Proto-Indo-Europeans. You know, if you're familiar with the term. And then you have more of the Asian type, the North Asians. Both people were the lightest people on the planet. And I think they may be kind of mixed, and that's where you get the term Eurasian. You're more into descendants of people who were like Mongolian and part European, Indo-European, something like that. This is where you see these mixtures of people in that area of the world. This is where that term Eurasian comes from. Not just it also a term because Eurasian, because you get Europe and Asia combined together, and people in that area of the world do and might have some Asian and and I say Indo-European for a reason because they have a little bit more color than the average European, but they're still Caucasian. They were in that area of the world, and they most likely what you call Hapas or Eurasians. Now, about 9,000 years ago, when these Sanskrit-speaking people who came from the area that would be known today as Persia, they are cousins to Persians. They are kin to them. They went down into the Hindu Kush Valley and started picking off the darker people there. And they created the Hindu caste system. Now, what do these terms, what is the Hindu caste system? What does it mean? What was it for? It was a way to keep social order and keep the Brahmins, aka Aryans, on top. You had your Aryans or Brahmins, and they were the architects and the priests, the people on top who held all the knowledge. The people under them was the military, and that was the the Brahmins, and then the Kshatriyas, military. Then the Vaishyas were the landowners and the merchants. Then the Shudras, those were the peasants. This sounds familiar, doesn't it? It does. Sounds like feudalism. I'll explain that in a minute. And then at the bottom, you have the Dalits, and these were the people that did the most undesirable work. But the thing with the Dalits were usually the darkest people. But today in the Hindu caste system, you find that there are uh, positions of the Hindu caste system, but I'm just explaining how it kind of came to be a little bit. So you got the darkest people on the bottom, and they are the ones who were demonized because their skin, their dark skin. Their dark skin was symbolic of being dirty and evil and hateful and pollution. Because when the light-skinned Brahmins, they started to mate with the Aryans, the Brahmins, they started to mate with the oppressed class. And since, light people and dark people, when they mix, they create brown skinned people. And darker, melanated people are more genetically dominant in our nature. This is how it is. You see dark plants, animals, and furry creatures all around. The Brahmins and other nomadic people, light complected nomadic people around the world, notice one thing: if you mate with the darker women, this is kind of where patriarchy comes into. If you mate with the darker women of the native population that you oppress and conquer, you will literally breed out the color of your own offspring, who's supposed to hold up your lineage. So they decided to keep all the dark people at the bottom, the light brown people above them, the lightest people, the light brown people right under them, and the light people on top. And this is where you get colorism, because colorism was created through xenophobia. That xenophobia was practiced through sex and sexual discrimination, meaning, oh, you're darker than me. My kids won't be light, so I'm gonna keep you back. But I'll get with that light skinned one, to keep my color intact. And also, there was a way with the practices, they would stay indoors to be out of the sun. Because if you look in India and other Eastern cultures that have this, they have Hinduism or Buddhism in there, an old tradition in the old ancient Asian world, especially Southeast Asian world, is stay out of the sun because of what it does to your skin. My guess, I don't know where that phrase came from, but my guess is seeing how the world works on light skin color is when light skin people started to rule over the dark people. They noticed not only do the dark people make you dark, make your offspring dark again, you staying in the sun can make you dark. So you have to stay in the shade, and also light skin and cancer and all that. Maybe they were aware of it, but you stay out of the sun and you stay indoors, so your light skin stays. Okay. Now it's on see, when this came about, this system went on for 5,000 years. See, this is why you see brown complected people all the way from India, and they seem racist as fuck to like black people or other people who are darker than them, or people who are just as dark as them, because they were once, because the people who were in northern Indians, because you have two factions of Indians, people of South Indian descent, they are darker. They are part of the original inhabitants of India. The people of the southern part of India, who are more lighter, or who are more related to the descendants of, who were the cousins of Persians, the Aryans, they are lighter. And I know that because I had one of my mentors tell me, from my college, she was a Filipino woman. So this system stayed in place for 5,000 years. So when different empires, the Mughal Empire, the Greek, the Mongols, the British, and and then eventually they created the British Raj. By the time the British got there in the 1800s, they were they already found out that they didn't have to really do much of anything to convince them that light complected people were better than dark people, because the brown and black people skinned people of India had been taken over by 4 different other empires who were light and fair complected. And see, when you were taken over by people who look different from you, and they all look similar in stature and phenotype, you create an envy. When you're oppressed, you're gonna create an envy towards them and a hatred towards yourself. So when the British got there, they noticed. When the Portuguese got there in the 1500s, when the Portuguese got there in the 1500s, they noticed that these Indian people were very, very, very aware of skin tone. And this is where the Spanish and the Portuguese got. Now, I want to say the Spanish started colorism in the Western Hemisphere of like what we know as the Americas, but I'm thinking they got it from their Portuguese cousins. I'm maybe, don't quote me on that. But the Portuguese noticed this very well, and this gave them an idea. Because also when the Spanish and the Portuguese and other European nations, when they went to Africa, Africa was conquered by the same types of people, but it wasn't like modern European societies. It was those ancient societies as like Assyrian, the Hyksos and the Hittites, which are kind of like I want to say another factions of like some nomadic Indo-European peoples or Proto-Europeans or whatever. They had already taken parts of Africa in ancient times, particularly Egypt. Like the lighter-skinned Egyptians, they ruled over the darker Black Nubians in some instances and enslaved the brown-skinned Africans. And they would practice, staying in the house and making these black and brown people make them slaves and work outside. See, chattel slavery did not start in America. It wasn't started by Europeans, it started by Arabs, but that's another story. So when Europeans would go to Africa and see these brown-skinned Arabs, because the Arabs did take over Africa before the Europeans did, they picked up on this, and they saw these light Arabs ruling over these dark Africans. It was pretty easy to see how they got the idea from. Europeans get people white European. They get blamed for colorism when I would say, if you ask me, it was their light complected Middle Eastern cousins who started it, but that got ramped up into religion, because colorism and religion have to go hand in hand. But when the British, and particularly Italians, because that's where you get the whole idea of Jesus from, because the face of Jesus is Italian. However, you got black faces of Jesus in Ethiopia. But to go back to what I was saying, when they saw what was going on in these Eastern countries, and you see when Europeans are seeing people who kind of look like them, but not quite like them, who speak different languages, and they're saying, he kind of looks like me, but he's not like me. But he's ruling over these dark people that we're trying to take over, and we are already kind of enslaving these black and brown and dark people all over other Americans. It gave them it doesn't take long to realize, I know how to take over these indigenous people. Because even though Europe had its own system of caste, Europe had predominantly, I want to say, as far as I know, they had a patriarchy. And that patriarchy, so you already had a patriarchy. See, like, the men in Europe, they already had patriarchy. They ruled over the women. But when they went to other lands, it gave them another idea, and it got modified to not just a European patriarch, but now a white male patriarch. This is where that term kind of comes out of. Okay, so you get this now patriarchy based on gender, now modified and enhanced by racism. And trust me, there had already been feudalism in like England and other places. Because like before, feudalism, you get 4 different stages of that. See, you get, and that was, I think that was based on class or political association. So it sounds more classist than anything. It doesn't sound more racist. It's not. It doesn't sound sexist, but it probably was by that time infected with sexism. Because again, you know, feudalism. You had the crown of the nobility on top, and above and below them you had the military, and below them you had the landowners, and then below them you had the serfs. Yeah, it sounds familiar. Yeah, I know. The feudalist system sounds like the Hindu caste system, because I want to say that some Europeans probably did go to India at one point, because the English and the Portuguese did go to India. And even before that, the Greek did go to India as well. Okay? But the cat, what was different from all the caste systems, I'll explain if you want to know. So when the Portuguese and the English, when they already saw what was going down, and they already had a kind of a caste system based on sexism and kind of based on class, once you throw race into the mix, it had already become systematic already. Okay? So they took this system, which there already was a picture of Western countries, but when they took their land and culture, they took their patriarch mindset and that the modified with classism in there, that feudalistic European male patriarchy, with the colorism, with the colorist color-based skin tone hierarchy of the East of Asia, and combined it, and then they took it on the road. And this is why you see a social hierarchy of racism. Now, when I mean racism, and in context of Western power structure, this is why people throw around white supremacy, racism, or white male patriarchy. Because you understand, this country, sexism, racism, and politics and gender go hand in hand in this country, because they're all fused in one together. Because in the West, the first thing that was used was religion to oppress people of color, and women too. And you can see that in the artwork. Because if you go to Africa and you look at or Google pictures of Jesus Christ and all the other prominent people, you will find that these people are more brown and maybe black or swarthy hair. But if you look at other nations like Brazil, Mexico, modern day West Africa, America, Canada, you will find that these look like Italians and Germans and French and other people like that. That's because they changed the images, because because the Judeo-Christian Roman religion we know today is Catholic or Christianity or whatever, that has its origins in Eastern Africa, and that's a whole different topic. So religion was used in the West to dominate, subjugate indigenous people across the planet. Then came law, and those were like the Jim Crow laws or the apartheid laws of South Africa or the black codes of the Confederate South. And then and even right before that, that would be like a third. When actually, I'm skipping. First it was religion, then it was science. When chattel slavery started around the world, particularly in the Confederate South and the American Caribbean, it was science that was used, because at the same time when different explorers like Christopher Columbus and Diego Cortez and James Cook, who went to Australia, and you know, Francis Galton and Charles Darwin, I know we like Charles Darwin, but Charles Darwin was one of the grandfathers of racial intellectual thought. I'm not lying. The BBC made a whole documentary on this, and his president and his cousin Francis Galton also had some racialized theories that really popped off anthropology. Unfortunately, anthropology in the West and culture and anthropology and uh, the study of skulls. Damn it, I can't remember. It says paleontology and all that. The study of bones and study of cultures. That has very racist roots because it was not used to find the origins of mankind. It was used to justify and make up racial theories of why people of color and indigenous people outside of Europe were savages and why they needed to be dominated and why they needed Western culture to be civilized. I'm not lying. You can look this up, and that's why. And I sent Ryan. I sent him a documentary. 2004, and that kind of gives you an idea of the second wave of racial intellectual hatred. So after that was law. So it was religion, law, and science. Now it's a cultural trend. See, with racism just does not dominate your existence as far as like how you get to function. See, racism is in every aspect of your life. It's in politics, obviously. You see Democrats, you see white Republicans and white conservatives and black Republicans and black conservatives and Latinos who are liberal and Latinos who are Hispanic. They clash with each other over politics, but based on culture and race. And one side believes that, you know, these certain people need to be out of the country, and one side believes that we need more immigrants in the country. So that race is in the politics. We know that now. But race is in sex. Races in sexual sex and relationships is because there were not miscegenation laws too. You race mixed before 1968. The only people that could do it without impunity were white men and some mixed people who had close proximity to white people. But it was so rigid that German people and Russian people could not have sex. You had to be Germans with Germans, Jewish with Jewish, Spanish with Spanish, blacks with blacks. It was that rigid, even within interethnic lines. Even law, Jim Crow laws, Confederate South, even with zoning practices of, you know, deciding who can live where and who can have what. It was in resources too, and unfortunately, you see it also in now. This is where we get socially engineered and it gets indoctrinated from generation to generation. We see it through movies, the way people get betrayed. We see it through TV, obviously, but it's also in the food and water. Yes, racism is in the water. Let me explain. When you look at nice areas in the country where it's stores and 24-hour fitnesses and all the nice foreign fresh organic food eateries, you'll find those in places like even in the Bay, Pleasanton, Hayward, San Francisco, Emeryville. They got all the nice Starbucks, all the nice fresh air, all the diverse. But if you look at the more ghetto areas, what they got a lot of bars, probably more so than major cities. They got a lot of fast food places, and we all know McDonald's and Popeyes and Chipotle, Taco Bell. They're good places, but they're like MGO food. I'm sorry. They're say MG. What kind of food is that? That's I can't remember. It's like genetically modified food. They're genetically modified foods. Okay. Now, like again, like you like the racism is, and that's kind of subtle. The racism is in our stuff we eat, because depending where you live and depending how much money you got, and this is where race, money, and resources come in hand. Depending how much money you got, the more access you have to healthier stuff. Because organic food is expensive. It may taste good in some instances, but all that vegan food and And vegetarian food is very wholesome and good, but the greasy stuff and spicy stuff is a whole lot more tastier, isn't it? But it's easier access too, because you can go. Because if you think I'm lying, go to a dollar store. Go to a dollar store and or Dollar General and look at the food and looks practice. You can look at that stuff and the shit tastes like plastic because I had this one piece of cheese and I bought a brand of it and I saw online Facebook a couple years ago this guy took a brand of cheese and he tried to burn it and it burned brown. Cheese is not supposed to burn brown. That's what plastic does. A lot of the food that in the inner cities and all these strange offshoot of Safeway and Albertsons type stores, the little low grade ones, they have a lot of processed foods that's unhealthy, that's slowly killing you. Okay, and more stores populated, from which I noticed, which has like more white people and less ethnic people. They have more of the fresh produce, and not to say that is not produce that, and not to say that Safeway and Albertsons and Harvey's, which is just the southern version of like Albertsons, and all the Lucky's, which they did bring that back. All the Lucky's, the big major grocery outlet stores, they have fresh food, yes, but also they do have a little bit of genetically engineered food. But the more crappy, more harmful food is more so near the inner cities. And you actually find that seeped into Walmarts and Targets. They just put that there. It's there too. And that's how evil and sick racism is, because it's been spread all over the world. Because if you didn't notice, and if you got to do your research on this, America was, I guess, the first major player in racism, because Germany, South Africa, Liberia, Namibia, other countries that came a little bit after, a few decades after, Australia, who have racial problems, they modeled their ideas on how to dominate and subjugate its indigenous people based on what America did in the Confederate South. And this is why you see it rampant today. But that's all I want to say. I know this was long, and I know it was kind of maybe educational and informative. I hope it was, because I feel that if you are a white person who needs to be well informed, you need to study. And I know I'm not trying to make you feel guilty for being white, but you need to feel something. Not guilt, but a sense of awareness and passion and drive and direction. If you are the type to be passionate about what you say and challenge other white people who are not in the same boat as you, who are less woke, more ignorant, who are for white nationalism and white ethnic state or whatever, that whole white male patriarchy or whatever, like you, and you feel you as a white man or white woman who need to challenge that system, you need to know where this comes from. And also it helps you have conversations with the people of color too, because we already know this, and some don't. You will find that some don't, but it makes sense for you to know a little bit more. So to give a short version, look up to understand what I'm saying. Look up social hierarchies, look up feudalism, look up Hinduism, look up caste systems to understand the social hierarchies. Look up colorism in reference to light people ruling over dark people. Look up Indo-Europeans, civilizations, and where they went. Okay, and look up like Google stuff like colorism in racial origin. I mean, racist origins of Africa or whatever. Just look up something that helps you understand what racism is psychologically, historically, and science wise. Like look up medical apartheid. Look up even in the medical industry, there is racism there too. That's how sick this is. And for you to understand these things, it makes you more aware. It makes you more conscious. So you're like, when something happens, you're not confused. But that's all I'm gonna say. I'm waiting for this to load. I'm gonna send it to a couple people. This is kind of long, so grab some Popeyes or whatever and sit down and listen to it like a damn podcast. So listen to my words. You don't need to listen to my face, really. All right, but this is all I got. Later.